My name's Megan, and thanks for the generous introduction. And I'm the product marketing lead on a new platform we're building out at Google called Engagement Rewards. That talks mostly about app engagement and kind of techniques for offering rewards within your app. Before we jump into the actual platform, I'm going to give you a little bit of context on the team that I work on, Next Billion Users. So at a very high level, Next Billion Users, our team uncovers human-centered insights and builds products for the next billion users first to ensure that Google's mission rings true for everyone, everywhere. So the first question you're going to have is, who are the next billion users? It's a great name. I think it's very aspirational. And it's actually not specifically defined right now. So we don't like to have one very tight definition of next billion users. However, you do have to define it if that's who you're working to build products for. So the most common way that we think about next billion users is thinking about internet connectivity. So essentially saying, who is the next generation coming online? Another definition that we think about often is perhaps the next generation. So people who are growing up now and growing up with technology, having their gateway to technology be very early, having very easy access to the internet. But to focus on that main definition of next billion users, here's a graph of internet users since 1994. And you can see that while it's steadily increased, in the last few years we've actually seen exponential growth. So here in 2019, there are about 4 billion internet users around the world. And then in the next few years, we actually project the next billion coming online for the first time. And this is something that's happening constantly. So we think of this as kind of a moving goalpost. So we may have the next billion, but then there's the next billion after them until we've reached a higher penetration of internet connectivity. So who are the next billion users? So when we think about the next billion users, you think often of the high growth markets in the world, but there are a few characteristics that I think are common between different NBU users across the globe. They tend to be mobile first, so that's their first and often only access to the internet. They tend to be multilingual. They have a wide range of literacy, and they're eager to come online and get connected to the rest of the world for the first time often. So you may be thinking, why does this matter for gaming and why does this matter for apps? So I'm going to talk about a specific NBU example, and I promise this will then lead into the story of how we built this platform or why we're doing that. But we're actually going to start in the Philippines, and we're going to think a few years back when data was actually extremely expensive in the Philippines. And then when we think about the users in the Philippines, they were very excited to be online for the first time. They spent a lot of time on social. They watched a lot of entertainment content. They played a lot of games. But they actually did not have much data because it was expensive. So they tracked it obsessively. Every gig of data, they would track over the month and often had to do manual ways to calculate that and make sure they were staying within their cap. So this was a top-of-mind issue. It seemed very accessible for our team to try to solve this. So a few years back, after all this UX research and finding this pain point, we thought we built the perfect solution. And we actually built a data-saving app specifically for users in NBU countries like the Philippines. So we launched this data-saving app, and we started running acquisition campaigns. We really felt like this was solving a unique user problem, and we thought we'd see really quick uptake. Interestingly enough, we did see a lot of interest. There was a decent amount of users downloading our app every day. It was a pretty reasonable cost per install. But once they downloaded the app, an issue we ran into is that users weren't actually turning on the data saver mode. So if you actually see on our mock, there's that little toggle where you turn on data saver mode. We thought this would give users a sense of power. They can turn on this setting, and then they would start to save their data in a more automated way. So we would help them track storage. We would help show them their data usage over the month. We would kill apps in the background. It would feel like magic for them. And what was interesting was that users were not actually activating that. So they would download the app, and for whatever reason, maybe they got a WhatsApp message or they got distracted by someone on the street, and they never actually bothered to go in and see if they had to do anything. They just figured, all right, download, let's see how it goes. So with this issue of massive app lack of massive churn, essentially, we had to think of a way to try to get users to experience the app, because we were saying, is this perhaps not a product market fit? Or is it just that we can't get users to turn on this key feature? So one solution we started working with was that we offered small amounts of data rewards. So we partnered with local data carriers in the Philippines, and we were able to get small increments of data that we could give to users if they turned on this setting. And it makes sense, but we actually did see an uptick in app retention. So for us, that was enough to give us a little bit of gumption to keep going, to realize that perhaps there is more opportunity for the app. Some background context that's not as relevant, but now, a few years later, data is actually much less expensive than it was a few years ago. So I'm not going to be talking about this particular app today because it doesn't quite solve the problem for users as much as it did a few years back. But the thing that we did learn is that maybe this works for other apps and games as well. So once users download, perhaps there's ways to use incentives or small amounts of rewards to get users to complete that key action. So we think of that as a North Star action, and perhaps you've heard that in other marketing materials or talks before. But that's kind of how we started working with app publishers to think through, is saying, what is your North Star action? And this looks different for every app or game, but most often it correlates directly with your key value prop. So don't think about monetization. It's not just the first in-app purchase, but it's the thing that makes your users realize that there's something valuable about this app or game, and they need to keep it on their phone. So in a gaming context, think of something like maybe you know that users who complete level 5 or whatever specific level, they get hooked after that, and that's the key. That's your North Star metric. So I'll break down essentially what this platform is, step by step. So we start with the game developer, app developer, and the platform essentially partners with these developers to pick an action and reward. And when I say developer, we often mean also the marketing team or the CMO suite or the PMs who manage this decision-making process. But this is an engagement tool. So what we do is we have you pick an action and reward, and then there is a technical integration aspect of that. But in terms of the things that you can actually control, it's picking the type of action within your app, the CPA, so the cost per action that you want to pay, and the type of reward. And the next step is where Google actually brings value. So essentially at scale, what we've decided is one of the hardest parts about experimenting with rewards is figuring out the data, measurement, analytics, but also all of the logistics, right? So the lift that goes with billing, payments, collections, making sure you're not getting scammed, so fraud and abuse protections, especially with these MBU countries where users have a lot of time and they may not have a lot of money. So they're very willing to kind of try different things often to perhaps get a reward more than once and things like that. So Google essentially takes care of that part once you've picked your action and your reward. Another thing that we worked on for this platform was actually diversifying the types of rewards we offer. So we work with reward suppliers in every market, and some of these reward suppliers are global, which is why you see some brands up there you recognize, but there's also local brands that are specific to the markets that we are live in or plan to launch in. So once you've picked the reward type and the amount that you want to pay, we help you with a reward redemption flow within your app or game so that it guides the user through the various steps to make sure they're eligible, and eventually the reward is given to the user once they've completed that action. So to actually show you what this might look like, there's a quick sample user flow, and we picked a fun app. So pretend we are talking about Pokemon Go. For those of you who aren't familiar, Gojek, the reward supplier logo here, is the largest ride-sharing company in Indonesia. So it's kind of like the Uber for their market. And it's actually one of our partners, so we figured it's a good time to feature them here. So the user is playing, actually let me back up one step so you can see. They're in game playing mode, and they see this banner pop up at the very top that says, catch 5 Pokemon in the next 7 days, and you'll get 30K rupiah of Go Ride credit. And then you can click learn more, you can give them more information about the offer, but the main thing here is just catching their attention, letting them know that there's real world reward essentially available if you do XYZ. So in this case, catching 5 Pokemon in the next 7 days. So they're playing the game, they catch 5 Pokemon, whether it's, and you can time lapse this, so maybe it takes them 2 days, but they catch 5 Pokemon. We know that they're eligible, so we actually show them this banner at the bottom that says claim your reward. So we're offering that, pushing them into the reward redemption flow. And the next part is something that is actually customizable for every app or game, but essentially it's just the reward redemption flow. We ask them to sync with their Google account only so that we can check for all of the fraud and abuse protections. At the very end, we offer them the code. So that's a quick overview essentially of what we've been working to build out, but we're actually in alpha mode, so not even in open beta quite yet. And it's something that we're building out as we onboard partners in different verticals and figure out what types of rewards work, what are best practices around pricing and things like that. So I'm here to share also a few learnings that we have so far. So driving users to the North Star action is difficult. I've talked about this already. I'm sure all of you know it's quite true. Otherwise, we wouldn't have as much of a challenge in launching new apps or games. And I mentioned this in that data saving app, but it's actually been true as we onboard more and more partners into our early access program. So one example, we have a file sharing or file management app that we've been working with, one of our first campaigns that we launched. And their North Star action was a peer-to-peer sharing or file cleaning. So those are two actions that we figured really define the value of their app. And when they launched, there were a lot of competitors in the space, and there wasn't much that set them apart. But they believed that this peer-to-peer sharing action was really fast, really dependable, and really could set them apart from competitors. And yet, it was one of their least used actions. So this seemed like a really good opportunity for them to work with us to figure out what can we do to actually move this metric. Getting new users to perform North Star actions drives retention. So this seems pretty intuitive, but it's crazy how true it is. So when we worked with this file sharing app, we were essentially able to reward users for peer-to-peer sharing. And we actually also use this as a bit of an acquisition tool. So the way that this campaign was designed was to have new users join the app and then complete a peer-to-peer file share. So essentially what they did, they were able to look at the retention for these new users who completed that North Star action, and they actually saw higher sustainability. So it's 20% higher retention for those users than users who were not acquired via this reward offer. Other things we found in the first week, there was a 750% increase in peer-to-peer file sharing, but I will caveat that that makes sense, right? We're offering users a little bit of monetary incentive, real-world incentive in order to see that uptick. So there was massive increase in feature usage, but that is a bit expected. But I think the biggest learning for us here was saying, not just within that first week, but if we can actually help users reach that North Star action, maybe there's more sustainable growth there. And we were able to, after the campaign ended 3 months later, essentially track the usage of that feature and able to see that there was an increase on a sustained level. So 3 months after that reward offer, people were still using peer-to-peer file sharing at a much higher rate than they were previously before. And so that may be a feature of just awareness, right? So maybe users hadn't tried it before, they didn't know it was a thing, they didn't know that it was faster, more reliable, whatever you think your feature is, but it did help move the needle for them on a more longer-term basis. So in terms of the third learning, localizing content for new markets is crucial. This is something that working on an NBU team, we learn all the time on every new product or platform that we're reaching. But for apps in particular, often these users, it's their first gateway to the internet. And what we find is that they're still very used to their own vernacular. So even the way they refer to a reward versus a promotion, or the way they expect a reward redemption flow to work, or understanding which email to sync with, things like that. It's really important that we actually go into these markets and do extensive UX research to understand the users, understand how they communicate, how they expect the product to communicate with them. So this is one huge learning we had. Another learning around localizing content is actually the reward type. So I think one thing that's challenging about working with rewards is you have to pick the right reward. So there's so many factors that go into a successful reward campaign, whether that's the type of reward, the amount, right? Is it valuable enough to incentivize users, and all the other noise that happens in the background. And one thing that we had to work a lot on is figuring out reward hierarchies. So saying, is food delivery credit more enticing, or is data more enticing? Or maybe it's rideshare credit, or it's retail gift card, or maybe it's an in-store activation. Like, there's so many different factors we can play with. Yeah, so that's one of the biggest learnings we had. And I actually wanted to keep this short, so that is the last learning I'm going to talk about, but I will transition into backing up into our early access program and talking about where we are today. So our country availability, we're live in India and Indonesia, and we are hoping to launch in Brazil very soon. So most things are in line. I think we should have one of our first campaigns this quarter, and the US in Q4, Q1 after that. A lot of the partners who are joining us at this stage are global companies that have some investment in these NBU countries, and essentially it takes care of some of the logistics for them. So figuring out local partnerships, figuring out what types of rewards make sense, pricing, essentially trying to use this platform as a way to run a campaign there without having to be as in the weeds. So I will end it on a short note, but if you're interested in joining us in early access program, please reach out. I am not the partnerships manager since I do work in product marketing, but our team is pretty agile and small and close-knit, so I will connect you with the right person. Yeah, but I hope that some of our learnings are applicable to your app or game and can help you think a little bit more about that North Star action, and rewards is a potential way to move you towards that. I think we have a few minutes left, so I'd like to open it up to questions.
So who finds and arranges these partnerships?
So for the reward suppliers, you mean?
Exactly.
Google does. So that's a huge part of the reason why we wanted this to be an open platform, is saying we know that there's so much work to be done in contracting and figuring out the right units and the amounts and all that stuff. So we're taking care of that. And right now there's no platform fee, so whatever the publisher is paying is actually just face value for the rewards.
That sounds great.
I'm wondering that what happens if your North Star experience is something that takes, say, like months to actually hit, like something that sits really far away? Do you guys have any things to kind of help address that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely proxy actions that can indicate that a user is moving towards that final North Star action. But I think if it's a really long lead cycle, often there's things you can do, probably not as much with rewards, but maybe that's something like little prompts, right, to help users get there, or giving them an engagement challenge. So one thing we think about too is potentially saying, over time, complete these several sequences of actions over the next few weeks, and then the reward type maybe is a higher amount. For you, if you feel like rewards isn't the way to do that, I would still say think about little ways to nudge the user, and I think tracking that journey to the final North Star action is important if it's that far out. But if it is truly the key differentiator for you, I think it's important to build a journey there and not just expect users to kind of find their way there. All right, we'll end right on time. Thanks for coming. If you have any questions, you can also talk to me after.
Great.